Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our DFS and prop preview for opening night of the NFL season. We've got ourselves a banger matchup between the Cowboys and the Eagles, and gotta make sure you're ready for all of your exposure on Thursday. With first off, a look at the Showdown slate and what we're doing for the single game exposure, and then afterwards, we're gonna talk about some prop stuff on PrizePicks and how to take advantage of the Dak Prescott free square that they've got up. So a little bit of a taste for our first game of 2025 and the first video of many to come throughout this year. So it's cut right to the chase, not waste any time at all. It started off with, first off, a look at the Showdown side of things and what we're doing for DFS. These Showdown previews are going to be very much so process-based compared to the picks and plays that you're going to see throughout the industry. We go player by player, we talk about the kind of game scripts where players make sense, the kind of correlation, the kind of stacking that you can use to really find success in the Showdown streets, and that's what my content is all about here, is trying to make you guys better players with the NFL. So more of an all-encompassing preview here, where not only will we talk about injuries, some of the better plays and whatnot, but also how to build proper lineups on top of that. So it started at the top of the board, and we're going to start with Saquon Barkley at $11,200, which I would say the first thing to note there is that the price tag is extremely soft on this slate, and pricing in general is going to be softer than what we see for the rest of the year. Typically, when we get to the playoffs, some of the bigger, even like Thanksgiving slates, the ones where a lot more casuals are playing DFS, you're going to see DraftKings, FanDuel make it a little bit easier to build lineups, and they start to do that with some of your top-end spend-up options. Saquon Barkley was over 12 grand for a lot of slates towards the end of 2024, and now even at the captain spot is a little bit less than $17,000, so that puts him at a little bit less than 2x points per dollar, which is still one of the better projecting plays towards the top end of the board, despite him having the highest price tag of anyone on the board. So that's not always going to be the case. So if you're a Saquon Barkley truther like myself, somebody that is expecting him to back up that historic season that he had in 2024 with at least a half decent one here in 2025, and he's a really good option for your DFS lineups. And I would say that he'll probably be at least 50% projected owned. At the flex position, you can see I have him at about 49% right now, but I think as the week goes on that he's going to get more and more attention from the masses, and the captain ownership might be a little bit more volatile. If the flex ownership goes up to 50% plus, there's actually a chance that this goes down at the captain position, whereas if maybe more people want to use him at the captain position than flex, it could go in the other direction as well. But about that 65 to maybe 70% combined ownership is what I'm expecting for him at the top. And he's not always going to be that highly owned. Sometimes it'll be closer to 50 to 55% combined owned, but that'll be when he's closer to 12 grand like he should be. Jalen Hurts is always a focal point of that Eagles offense. If you go with a Barkley lineup, particularly at the captain position, it is going to make it a little bit less likely for you to be well over the field on a Jalen Hurts, as they do cannibalize each other's production. Jalen Hurts, a lot of him going out there scoring 20 to 30 fantasy points, oftentimes is because of him posting at least one rushing touchdown, which doesn't always directly make Barkley a non-optimal play, but if Hurts is going to score a touchdown or two, particularly if it's over 2+ rushing touchdowns like he did at times in 2024, and that is going to make Barkley a much less likely play to make it to the optimal lineup. So there's some anti-correlation between these two players, but it's not like I'm only going to be using one or the other. There will be a few lineups where I'm using both together, particularly if I'm going with like a 5-1 Eagles-led lineup, but because they're also the most expensive two players on the slate, I think most people out there are going to pick one of these two players. So if you were to fade both of them, that would be a clear way to get different to the field, probably a foolish one, as they are your two highest projecting plays on the slate. However, if you want to also play both together and use that as a way to perhaps get different, that could also be a lower owned combination. So Showdown, I'd say football in general is a little bit more complicated than some of the other DFS sports that we have out there, particularly Showdown, where correlation and game scripting is so important. And you'll probably hear me talking about going with like 5-1 Eagles lineups or 4-2 Eagles lineups and vice versa. What that means is taking that many players from that team in that lineup. So if I say a 5-1, that means 5 players from the Eagles that you're using in that lineup, 1 player from the Cowboys. And that's another way to add differentiation as well. Not only do we have to think about combinations of players, but also the kind of game script that we're playing for. And if we use a 5-1 Eagles lineup where we've got 5 guys on the Eagles and 1 on the Cowboys, we're assuming that it's going to be a blowout towards the Eagles side of things. And, if you went with a 4-2 Cowboys or even a 5-1 Cowboys lineup, considering they're the underdogs, that would be a bit surprising to go with a full 5-1 Cowboys. But what you'd be getting with that sort of lineup construction is extremely low ownership. So even though the combined ownership or the product ownership of your team in a Cowboys 5-1 could be pretty similar to, especially if you took some differentiated plays in like a 5 5-1 Eagles lineup, you might be able to get the same kind of product ownership across both of those builds. But in practicality, when you take a look at the usage rates and your chances of duplicating, the 5-1 Cowboys lineup that is a little bit more of an outside game script is going to have much less exposure in the GPPs. So that's what makes this a little bit different compared to some of the other sports, is that you have to be thinking about game scripts, and everyone out there as well, most of the field is thinking about game scripts when they're building lineups. So you've got to consider that when you're thinking about your strategy ahead of time and where you want to get different compared to what the rest of the field is doing. First up, we got our first Cowboys player. That is a $10,800 CD Lamb. He's still the number one wide receiver on the Cowboys, but the big question mark this year is going to be what George Pickens does. And I'll give you some hot takes, particularly when we get to Pickens, as I think it's going to lower his average projection compared to what he was on the Steelers, that he's no longer getting those number one targets. But CD Lamb, being that alpha male, one of the top 3 to 5 wide receivers that we have in the entire NFL, could actually make Pickens have a higher ceiling because he's no longer getting that double coverage in the red zone. Pickens is going to get one-on-one matchups, which if you saw him on the Steelers when he got those one-on-one matchups, I'm a big Steeler fan, as you guys can see with the shirt right here. I mean, he eats them up. He's one of, if not the best wide receivers on those one-on-one matchups. So it has me thinking that one of two things can happen. There's going to be games where if they really focus on Lamb, where Pickens is going to take advantage of those sort of things. And then there's going to be games, and maybe it's after Pickens has a nuclear performance, where they go, well, we can't really leave Pickens on his own in the red zone, where CD Lamb gets a single coverage. Maybe they even throw him in the slot to add on top of that, and he ends up eating for this Cowboys team. So I could see either one of those two players being one of the optimal captains for this Thursday game. So I'm going to be using both of them for that kind of exposure. To give you guys an idea, by the way, everything that's blacked out towards the right over here is posted on my Patreon page. That is, of course, where I'm posting all these spreadsheets throughout the week. These projections are as of Saturday, the week before, so they probably are going to change quite a bit as the week goes on. I mentioned with the Barkley ownership, right, maybe moving a little bit in either direction, but all these projections that we see on there are going to tweak a little bit as the week goes on. But what you can't see towards the right side is my player pool and the kind of scripting notes that I have. We're going to talk about a lot of the scripts here, the kind of correlations that we want to be using with these players. But I will say that guys like CD Lamb, George Pickens, even though you won't see it on the spreadsheet here, are already in my player pool at the captain position. So I'm a large field GPP player, just to give you guys that perspective. I'm somebody that enters 150 lineups for all of these showdown slates, typically into the $5. That's the stakes that I'm the most comfortable playing at this stage of my career. But I'm somebody that thinks with a portfolio sort of approach. So though in my big high dollar single entry lineups, I'm going to not be going to like a CD Lamb or a Pickens at the captain position. That's more than likely either going to be a Barkley or a Jalen Hurts that I'm doing that with. But in the GPP builds where I've got to get a little bit different, and I might even mix in some 4-2 or some 5-1 Cowboys builds to try and play against what the rest of the field is doing, that's where guys like Lamb and also a George Pickens come in. And it's worth noting as well that if I'm going to use either of those two at captain, then I'm going to be forcing in a Dak Prescott at the flex position. And that's part of what you get by joining my Patreon page, is the kind of roles that I'm setting in my optimizer to make sure that I'm getting proper lineups built when I'm using that sort of a tool. When you're doing it by hand, it can be easier to game script, kind of think through a specific kind of outcome before building your lineup. But when you're doing it on an optimizer, it's not always as easy to do so. That's why there's a lot of sites that sell you sims, all this stuff that can kind of do it that way. You can also set roles to make sure that your optimizer is building correct lineups. So for example, in a lot of optimizers, they have it separated between guys at flex and at captain. Well, all you have to do is say, if you use CD Lamb captain, for example, then mix in Dak Prescott flex, and it automatically makes sure that that's going to be done for you. So those are a few of the things that you can find behind my paywall, is exactly how to get that done. But that's how I'll be deploying both of those players at the captain position. Let's move on to a few Eagles players now. So we got AJ Brown at $9,400. That price tag, by the way, is extremely soft on a player that is probably going to be about 10 grand, if not over that price tag for most of the year, at least if his production matches up to what we had in 2024. And you can see at the flex position that the ownership starts to drop a bit. You had those players close to 50% in the top two cases, closer to 35% on AJ Brown on Saturday. We'll have to see where it ends up as the week goes on, but I'd say that this is a very fair ownership number, and one that I'd be willing to get over the field on and pretty much flex or at the captain. Also, just like we have with CD Lamb and the George Pickens captain exposure, if I'm going to use AJ Brown at captain, which I probably will, that's going to be a forced in Jalen Hurts at flex on top of that. We've also got Dak Prescott here. He's is 9 grand, also extremely soft, but that's pretty much everyone towards the top. Really, the first player that is priced adequately would be a Devonta Smith here. Before we deep dive Devonta, though, just want to go back to Dak for just 1 second. It's also worth noting that we want to set roles when we're using quarterbacks. For me, when I'm using a non-rushing quarterback like Dak, and after his brutal injury a few years ago, he just doesn't run anymore. It's just not his style these days. That sort of quarterback, I want at least 1 pass catcher, no matter what, in every single lineup that I'm using a Dak Prescott, if not 2+, if you really want to force in that correlation. Because if a Dak Prescott's going to score the 20+ points that we need, barring maybe a 1-yard rushing touchdown or maybe 2 of them, that would be like the one case where maybe he gets there by himself. It would be a very low percentage outcome. Most of the time, if not all the time, for Dak Prescott this year, he's going to bring on at least one of those wide receivers with him, if not 2. It could be a wide receiver, it could be a receiving running back, a tight end, of course, would also qualify for that correlation. But when I'm using these quarterbacks, especially ones that aren't rushing heavy, I'm going to be forcing in that correlation as well. And it's worth noting with the Jalen Hurts that he does have a lot more rushing upside than a Dak, so I don't think we have to force in a wide receiver in every single lineup. However, in the case of a Jalen Hurts, what I do on my optimizer exposure is that I'll say that when I use a Jalen Hurts and he's making himself into my lineups, then I'm going to boost up the projection of his pass catchers. And I typically do that anywhere between a 5 to a 10% bump. There are different optimizers around the industry that allow you to do so. I have a custom coded optimizer that I add that in for myself, but there are plenty of others that also give you that functionality where you don't have to have like a player in there 100% of the time with the Jalen Hurts, because especially with a rushing heavy quarterback like him, like there's a chance he could get there without a wide receiver, like maybe a 4-2 or a 5-1 Cowboys lineup where Hurts is 1 or maybe 2 of the players that you're using as a buyback. You don't want to count on that every single time either. So those are the sort of things that you should be thinking about towards the top end of the board. I would say everyone from George Pickens it up is going to be in my player pool. The real question is going to be how much. And the only player that I'm not completely sold on and that I want to see the ownership on first is going to be Devonta Smith. I guess there's a chance that he doesn't make my exposure, but given the fact that you normally don't have to fade somebody at the top to get the kind of differentiation that you need, we can do that more towards the bottom end of the board. And this is where it also differs from what you'd have in like a PGA slate. There's less players to choose from when we're on an NFL slate like this, but on top of that as well, we also kind of have to play a lot of this chalk, right? We're not going to be all taking guys that are 1 to 5 to 10% owned like we would be in a PGA DFS lineup. And I know I have a few members this year that are maybe newer to the NFL side or maybe newer to my process when it comes to NFL. Ownership looks completely different than what it does for PGA. With PGA, I'm trying to get at least 2, maybe even 3 pivots into every single lineup. There might only be 1 pivot that I have in these showdown lineups, right? I might be more so trying to get that differentiation by leaving salary on the table, by doing it with the game script, going with that underdog script, a 4-2 or a 5-1 with the Cowboys would be that for Thursday. It is a lot more important from the ownership angle. So that's why I'll play all these guys at the top. I'll mix them all in and really use the middle to the bottom end of the board to get any of those low-owned diamonds in the rough in there, and then get different with my actual lineup construction, which is, I would say, an even bigger part of the process than what we have for the ownership angle. A little bit further down the board, so we're starting to get towards the value tier here, where you're getting guys that are less than the average salary. At Dallas Goedert, Javonte Williams, I think are solid plug-and plays. Worth noting that at least at this point on a Saturday, that Goedert is still technically questionable. He is expected to be a full go for week 1, though, so barring any sort of a last-second setback, he should be good to go for Thursday, but keep an eye on that, of course. You never really know when a player is technically questionable. Worth noting, though, that his projection is decent for this range, really doesn't stand out that much, I guess because of that questionable tag. Also, Javonte Williams at $5,400. He's the running back 1 for the Cowboys this year. You have Miles Sanders listed at number 2 and then Jaden Blue at number 3. Worth noting, though, that Jaden Blue and a Miles Sanders are both technically questionable, and given that a Blue is a whole $5,000, which for a running back 3 is just far too expensive, it makes it hard, even in large field GPP lineups, to want to take a shot on that sort of an option. So I think if you're going to use a running back for Dallas, it's more than likely a Javonte Williams, maybe a Miles Sanders. Only reason I say that is that he is the cheapest out of the 3 and running back 2. That would be a GPP only sort of option. But for your cash lineups, for your big dollar single entries where you want to be a little bit more safe about who you're playing, Javonte Williams is the player that you want for the Cowboys. Jake Ferguson is extremely cheap at $5,200. You can see that he's the first player that projects for over a 2x points per dollar, which is usually when it gets to like a cash lock. In cash lineups, you just want to optimize based on projection as most as you can. You don't even have to play game scripts when it comes to your cash lineups. You just pretty much play the best combination of 6 players that you possibly can. Jake Ferguson in those sort of builds is going to be making all of mine for Thursday. And that's, assuming that we're not going to get any sort of last second information on him having a snap count of him. There could be some crazy stuff that comes out in the NFL. So I don't want to say that 100% he's going to be in all my cash lineups for Thursday, but at a 2x points per dollar projection, there's a very good chance that he does so. Worth noting that these kickers, Brandon Aubrey, also a Jake Elliott, kickers in general are players that I am well over the field on for most events. Reason for that is kickers normally a lot cheaper than they should be. The ownership on them has been going up over and over again over the last few years as people have kind of conned on to how much value that these kickers have, and they help you with some game scripting as well. If you're going to go with a 4-2 or a 5-1 stack for either side, a lot of people will find it tough to find 4 or 5 skill position players that they feel like can get there for an optimal performance. Don't forget on these kickers. They can be included with some of those stacks, and anytime a team is scoring a lot of touchdowns, scoring a lot of points, posting a whole lot of yardage, their kickers are also going to have a lot of opportunities to kick as well. And maybe it is a whole lot of touchdowns and just points after touchdowns that these players are posting, but if they are just, ending up a little bit short in that field goal range, could be massive for their fantasy score. Eagles defense is one that I'll be using in large field GPPs. I'll be correlating them with really heavy Philadelphia Eagles lineups. I almost said Phillies, thinking about baseball here, I guess. But yeah, with the Eagles, a Barkley-led lineup at captain, I would say that gives a boost to the Eagles defense, because if Barkley's going to get 20 to 30 touches, like he probably will need to be the optimal captain, the Eagles defense is probably not going to be on the field as much, so that would be a boost to them. We already talked about Miles Sanders a bit. A Cowboys defense, I won't completely discount. They are the underdogs here, so I normally like to be a little bit heavier on the favorites when it comes to the defense/special teams. But if the Cowboys are going to pull off a big upset here, you're going to look at extremely low ownership on them from the defensive side of things. And something else that I'll point out is the correlation between a defense and their returner. You could say the same thing about the Eagles and their returner. There's going to be some correlation there too. But if Kevontae Turpin, who is the punt returner and kick returner for Dallas, happens to take one for 6, not only does he get the points out there from the DFS angle, but you also get that with the Cowboys. So if I'm going to use Turpin, at least in some cases, it's going to have some correlation with me using that Cowboys defense, which is another thing that you'll see on my script section over here on the right. So you can see here, right? It's flex pull, guys I'm using at flex, guys that I'm using at captain. And then with every play, I give you the script notes, right? So even if there aren't any script notes, it's like you can use them in any sort of lineup. It's fine. I at least tell you that, right? I'm not going to be the kind of tout site that just assumes that you know these sort of things. Especially for people that are newer to playing Showdown, I try to make it as easy and as clear cut as possible. I also have a core play section on here as well for all my Patreon members, which talks about whether I'd use them in like a cash and some of my high dollar stuff. And then towards the right here, I don't want to give away too much. So that's why I waited to go over this stuff until we got towards the bottom. But I put in player notes for pretty much every player that's in here. And towards the top, every single player is covered. So that's why I wanted to scroll down here a bit. But as the week goes on, I'll be adding even more player notes to give you an idea of the usage that you're going to see for these guys. The just extra notes that I couldn't fit into the script section and all of that, to make sure that everyone has all the information they need. And, a lot of times it's quantitative, giving you projections you can count on, ownership projections that make sense and that are going to be accurate, but also making sure that you know who the heck these players are and how they're trending heading into that given week, which we do here in the videos. But even if you can't catch the videos, right, that's why I like doing it for my Patreon page, so that you can get it in that Spark Notes version there as well. Speaking of, Jalen Tolbert is going to be the slot wide receiver for Dallas this year. He's only $3,400, so relatively affordable. And I would say that the early sportsbook lines on him don't feel fair. I'm actually higher on him than it seems like the rest of the industry is. So my projections, at least early in the week, are usually highly correlated to the sportsbook lines, but I do make adjustments to them as the week goes on. So there's a chance that Tolbert is somebody that I project higher than what we have right here at 3.9 points, just because I don't think he's getting as much respect as he should. Same thing with Jahan Dotson. He's also technically the slot wide receiver for the Eagles, but you're going to see Devontae Smith, even AJ Brown mix into the slot quite a bit. And Dotson last year, he played on the outside and on the inside when he was playing for the Commanders a bit. So I think the reason why he is their number 3 is because of that versatility. He gives the other 2 wide receivers a chance to, move in motion, run a different type type of route tree as a result of that. So I don't know if he's going to get as much usage as those top two. They're not going to run 3 wide receiver sets that often for the Eagles. A lot of times they'll run 2 tight end sets. I mean, they're a rushing heavy team, so that would make a whole lot of sense. But in large field GPPs, even getting on the field is absolute gold, and at least gives you opportunity to get at one of those big plays for a touchdown. So guys like Tolbert, Dotson are 100% going to be in my exposure. I would say that Tolbert's probably the safer player, though, if you're looking for a cash lock towards the bottom. A.J. Dillon is the number 3 running back for the Eagles, so not somebody that I'm expecting to see the field very often at all. But because of his big frame, he is going to be somebody that could be used in goal line situations, particularly if Barkley needs taken out of the game for a little bit of a breather. If they're at like the 1 to 2 yard line, rather than going with the number 2 running back Will Shipley, who's a little bit more shifty, also a receiving back out of the backfield, whereas Dillon kind of has the stone hands. He has a ton of drops out of the backfield. Probably wouldn't use him on third downs. But towards the goal line, I could easily see them favoring a Dillon over a Shipley. So I think Shipley is the one that, especially from the median projection standpoint, is really going to stand out. In cash, I'd be going to Will Shipley for sure over going to an A.J. Dillon. But in large field GPPs, there's at least a time and place or an avenue for Dillon to get there. Kevontae Turpin, we mentioned a little bit before as well. He's the number 4 wide receiver for the Cowboys at this point. But he will see the field even if he's not playing in traditional wide receiver sets as a bit of a gadget player at running back. He'll, run some of those jet sweeps out there for the Cowboys too. So that on top of the returning usage that he'll see could get him there from the fantasy standpoint. Grant Calcaterra, he is technically the number 2 tight end for the Cowboys. A little bit more of a rushing threat than a receiving threat though. So, $2,400, he's not necessarily the best play towards the bottom, but you can never ignore those backup tight ends. Luke Schoonmaker, same thing, backup tight end for Dallas. Technically questionable, so another player that you want to keep an eye on with his injury status as we get closer to Thursday, but he's $1,600. You can't ignore these backup tight ends, but they're not sexy, that's for damn sure. Yeah, the fullback / running back for Dallas and Hunter Lepke. He's more of a short yardage back, so kind of like Dillon. If he's ever going to get there, it's probably because he scores that 1 to 2 yard touchdown on that fullback dive. And then Kylan Granson is the 3rd tight end for the Eagles, but I would say that if I was looking for a cheap tight end of the Eagles, I would prefer to go to a Granson over a Calcaterra just because Granson has more receiving upside. Now, is he going to see the field very often at all or even at all for Thursday? We're not quite sure yet. We'll have to see what the beat reporters tell us as we get closer to lock, but that's what I'm thinking for this slate, guys. And just to give you guys an idea for my exposure, I usually like to give you guys an idea where I'm leaning. In cash, probably a floor 2 Eagles lineup. I think that they're the rightful favorites here. In my cash and some of my higher dollar stuff, that's typically where I like to go. But in my large field GPP exposure, I'm going to have some Eagles-led lineups. I'm not going to completely ignore that. But when I'm trying to get different and, trying to get cute play against the rest of the field, which large field GPPs is a more than viable strategy, I'm going to be doing that with some 4-2 Cowboys lineup. So not completely ignoring the Eagles side of things. If I'm running a 4-2 Cowboys, probably taking one of these top 2, not the 2 together, and then trying to find a mid to a lower tier Cowboys player for my other buyback. But that's what we're doing for Showdown. And now for some prop stuff. So we've got ourselves a little 2-man here on the PrizePicks side, taking advantage of a promo that we have to start the year. So anytime you get a free square in PrizePicks, Underdog, any of those pick'em sites that you have around the industry, please enter them, take advantage of them. They are the sports books giving you a bone, giving you a little bit of extra funds to use for the year. And considering that they've got some pretty serious rake that they're using in most cases, you want to take advantage of that to offset that. So we've got ourselves this over on Dak Prescott pass yards. He's at 0.5. Barring an injury, he's going to go over, and even if he doesn't, they're going to refund you in most cases on the sportsbook, so nothing we really have to talk about there. But let's talk about what I'm pairing it up with, and this is going to give you guys a little bit of a taste for the prop exposure and the kind of process that I use throughout the year, but I combine traditional analysis out there with using some plus EV value as well. I find, especially for NFL, that when you can combine both of those, that you can find a lot of value, and then on top of that, we're not really doing that on this slip in particular, but you see that for a lot of the exposure that I enter throughout the year is correlation, entering for game scripts. So just like we do for the Showdown side, as we just went through, trying to kind of account for the outcome that we have in mind, you want to do the same thing from the prop side of things. If you've got a team that's a massive favorite, you think they're going to try and run out the clock, maybe be a little bit more conservative because of that, you can play for that. And then on the flip side of things, if you think the other team's going to be playing from way behind, you can obviously try and attack some more passing props because they're going to have to pass more. Maybe it's an over on attempts, an over on receiving yards, receptions, or one of the top wide receivers on that team. You can game script just like we talked about throughout the rest of this video. So not so much the case here, but let's go through why I like this Jalen Hurts over. First off, last year he went over in 10 of his 17 games. I'm never a huge games, box score watcher, but this isn't just the case for last year, right? Jalen Hurts has had over a 50% rushing touchdown rate for his entire career at this point. So for him to be minus money for the over is usually commonplace for him in any of these given matchups. And on DraftKings right now, he's minus 150 for his over. He's minus 165 for his over on FanDuel. Now, the thing we have to keep in mind with those markets is that they are one-way markets. You can't bet the under on those, at least right now. They probably will closer to lock on a site like DraftKings and FanDuel. But with the one-way market, we have to adjust it down a bit, right? It's probably not a true minus 150, minus 165 odds. We more so want to look at markets like Pinnacle, where you can bet the over and the under at the same time. Those aren't available quite yet, though. So with the minus 150 to minus 165, we can try and compensate for it and get an idea for where, a site like Pinnacle is likely to price it. And it's looking at right about minus 135 odds, which anytime I'm getting over minus 130, that is starting to approach that plus EV threshold that I'm looking for. And then we want to add some traditional analysis on top of it. And with Jalen Hurts in this offense, you've got the tush-push machine working for him. He's got well over that 50% rate for the year. They're favorites, and it's the first game of the year. I mean, they've got to been working on some stuff as the offense, and they're going to go out there and try and deploy an attack against this Dallas secondary. And early in the year, you see a lot of emphasis on rushing attacks in the red zone. You're not going to see as much passing, but it's just execution, teams not being completely on their shit. A lot of these quarterbacks, especially the rushing heavy quarterbacks, you see an uptick in production the first 4 to 5 weeks of the year. So I like that for Hurts. It's a little bit of plus EV value as well. On Underdog, by the way, if you were trying to enter this over on touchdowns, it's like a 0.8x multiplier. So obviously they see that, minus 150, that minus 165, and they're trying to account for that. PrizePicks hasn't quite been able to do so yet. So that's what I like to do on these free squares is I try and find the best plus EV prop that I possibly can. And then, if it makes sense with the game script, the traditional analysis that I'm running on top of it too. And those are the kind of slips that you're going to see me entering. But on top of just the slip, I'm going to have a lot of exposure that I'm going with for Thursday. So keep an eye on that for on my Patreon page. Not only do I have all the fancy stuff on there that you saw before, but every piece of Underdog and PrizePicks exposure that I'm entering. Also on the sports books, I have that down here in South Florida now. As of last season, we had a full season for the first time with NFL props, which means on Hard Rock Bet, I'll be entering a lot of these props just straight up as well over there too. So for all the prop stuff I'm taking, make sure to join the prop tier on the Patreon page. The NFL DFS tier is how you can get access to the spreadsheets that you saw before. But that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck with everything that we're going to get for this Thursday. And let's have ourselves a start to the year. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already. And thank you guys for showing support here on the channel. Subscribe so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. All the major Showdown slates we're going to have covered here on YouTube, as well as main slate for weeks 1 through 17. We're going to be covering some of my top stacks. That's usually my main piece of content that I do for the main slate, but also my top value plays, and of course live streams before lock, getting you guys ready for all the action to come. So subscribe. All that's free here on YouTube, by the way. But if you guys want to support the channel and what I'm doing even more than that, and get access to every single piece of analysis that I do for all these slates, make sure to check out the Patreon page as well. For a chance to earn a free month on my Patreon page, I want you guys to give me your optimal captain for Thursday, and you just got to give me their projection within 2 points. That's going to be their captain score, by the way. So for example, if you think Barkley is going to be the optimal captain and he'll score like 35 captain points, then just put Barkley and then 35 down, and the person that gets the correct optimal captain and the closest score will end up winning that free month of the Patreon. And that's how you get access to all the projections that you saw in this video, every single player covered, my entire player pool on there as well, all the script notes on top of that too, and every single prop and betting piece of exposure that I'm mixing in. And I like to give you guys as much free content as humanly possible here on YouTube, but it has to have shelf life, right? So a lot of times, like this video that we have here, I do them well ahead of time so that people on YouTube can see it, can digest it, have a chance to actually get to watch the video. But for everything as it updates closer to lock, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces, particularly as we start to get injury news towards the middle to the later half of the year. That's where the Patreon page particularly becomes valuable, because with those moving pieces, I'm able to update projections, find some value and some edges to attack against the rest of the field, and that's where it really comes in handy. So check out the Patreon if you guys haven't already. Again, I appreciate your support. Smash that like button if you guys haven't already gone around to it, and I'll see you guys for all the content throughout the year.